Gore rocks, kicks, delivers. Fastball hit in the air to deep right center. Hassel going back, slowing up, has a play, and makes the catch just before crossing out of the warning track to retire the side. So Mackenzie Gore, 3 straight scoreless innings. He retires 11 in a row, and he retires 14 of the last 15 Cubs.
Charlie Slows last night along with Dave Jagler as the Nats shut out the Cubs behind Mackenzie Gore's 7 innings of 3-hit, no run, no earned run pitching. He has been outstanding. So have the Nats, who have won 5 of 7 and are solidly in 3rd place in the National League East. They are a game and a half ahead of the Atlanta Braves. Good morning, everybody. On a morning in which it will lead into an evening in which the NBA Finals will get underway. Not the most anticipated of NBA Finals in recent memory. Oklahoma City and Indiana. Probably a nightmare for the NBA, but nothing's really a nightmare for the NBA. They signed a $76 billion television deal last year. They're fine. And in many ways, this may be an introduction to the game's great young stars. And it should be a decent series. Tonight, Game 1, we'll talk about the NBA Finals during the show today. Lots of football talk on the show today. Starting with this, I got this tweet from G-Rob DMV to Atlanta. It's not really a discussion point anywhere else but here in D.C., and he's talking about OTAs. And so he attached it's funny, he attaches a story. Ravens missing nearly 20 players from OTAs. And this was from last year's OTA session, a headline, and he said, no one else is talking about it except for here in D.C., except he's attaching a headline story from Baltimore last year. I was curious as to whether or not G-Rob DMV was right. And he's not even close to right. Sorry, Rob DMV. I just Googled OTA absences, and literally multiple stories, if you go through multiple pages, multiple stories on at least 27 of the league's 32 teams appear. Everybody talks about OTAs in every single market. Here's some of the headlines. Digs at Patriots OTA after absence, viral boat video. I heard about that last week. Baltimore Ravens send clear message with impressive OTA attendance. So clearly there was a lot that was made last year about their poor attendance, and they've got better attendance now. Kirk Cousins, James Cook among prominent NFL OTA absences. James Cook, only no-show as Bills open OTAs. Cowboys fans shouldn't overreact to Micah Parsons' Week 2 OTA absence. Texans quarterback C.J. Stroud misses another OTA practice. D'Amico Ryans has to explain why. Lions OTA attendance along with injury report. Very interesting discussion. 4 Chiefs starters missing from first public OTA practice, and it just goes on and on and on. Literally, over the last week, pages of OTA stories from every other NFL market, and I found multiple stories for 27 of the 32 NFL markets. So, sorry, everybody talks about OTAs. I think it's overdone, too. Now, the Marshawn Lattimore situation for us this year is an interesting conversation, and maybe we'll get into it more deeply as the show goes on. On the show today, you're going to hear from schedule maker Mike North. Remember, we had him on before the schedule came out, about a month before the NFL schedule came out. You're going to hear from him about the putting together of Washington's 2025 schedule and a lot more. He was fabulous. I recorded this about a week and a half ago, and he was great. And it's all, timely forever until the season actually begins. Also, I've been promising for you golf fans, this guy that wrote the Golf Top 100 book, he was excellent. We're going to try to work that into the show as well today. I wanted to start with this because I still can't wrap my brain around something that I had an emailer help me discover yesterday. And Max, I want you to pay attention because I bet you and the majority of listeners did not know that this was possible. Pete in Potomac wrote me, Kevin, did you know that an NFL team can end up with just 1 point in a game? It's never happened, but here's how it could. And then Pete attached the explanation per the NFL rulebook and a video from somebody explaining how it can happen. So let me just make sure that everybody understood what Pete was sending me. It's not that everybody understands you can get 1 point on an extra point. You kick an extra point, it's worth 1 point. But that follows a touchdown. That's not what he was talking about. He was talking about the possibility exists that a game could end with a final score of 14-1 or 24-1 or 35-1. Did you know that, Max?
No. I'm very interested to hear the explanation because scoring 1 point in an NFL game seems unprecedented. And
it's never happened.
And when/if it happens, I know that whatever fan base it is will get clowned quite a bit on the internet. So I'm very excited for that.
Let me just tell you, it is a long shot for it to happen. But I'm almost 100% positive that I did not know that this was a possibility. Now, I talked about it briefly on my podcast yesterday, and a couple of people reached out and said, I think you talked about this like 10 years ago. I don't think I did. I am pretty sure that I did not know that a team could end up with just 1 point in an NFL game. So here's how it would happen. In the NFL rulebook, Rule 11, which is the scoring section where they describe how you get points, touchdown, field goal, extra point, 2-point conversion, safety, etc. In Section 3, there is a lot discussed about what they call tries. Tries are extra points or 2-point conversion attempts. And then in Rule 11, the section on scoring, Section 3, the section on tries, Article 2C talks about how a safety on an extra point, meaning a kicked extra point, or a 2-point conversion, how it would be actually scored. And here's how the rule actually reads. The rule reads as follows, quote, if the try results in what would ordinarily be a safety against either team, 1 point is awarded to the opponent. So how would a team end up with getting 1 point? Well, there are a couple of possibilities. I'm not going to go through 2-point conversion and kicked a PAT. Just understand that the only way to get awarded 1 point is on a try. Okay, a try being what happens after a touchdown is scored, which is an extra point or a 2-point conversion attempt. So whether you're kicking an extra point or you're going for 2, that is the only scenario in which 1 point can be awarded, other than kicking the PAT through the uprights. So what can happen and how you would end up with just 1 point in a game is if you didn't score in any other way and you were the team on defense as the opponent who had just scored a touchdown is lining up to either kick an extra point or go for a 2-point conversion. If that play got wild as follows, let's just say the kick got blocked. The kicker picks it up. He's running around. He gets hit, the ball comes loose, and it's going backwards. Okay? It's now down to the 35, 40-yard line. And now the holder picks it up, and he's running around, and he's going backwards, and somehow the team that was attempting the try, either 2-point conversion or a kicked extra point, gets tackled in their own end zone. It's a long way away from where the try attempt happens. I understand that. On a kick, it happens from the 27-yard line. It's a 37-yard extra point. 2-point conversion, we know, is from the 2-yard line. All right. But if somehow the ball worked its way all the way back to that end zone and the kicking or the attempting try team got tackled in the end zone, the defensive team would be awarded 1 point. And therefore, if they didn't score another point during the game, they could end the game with just 1 point. Now, the other way 1 point gets awarded is, well, let me go through one other scenario there. Look, it's a long shot, but if you're going for 2, let's just say, and it gets picked and the guy's running it back down the sideline, and then all of a sudden he gets stripped, at the 15-yard line, ball's loose, and somebody from the attempting 2-point conversion team, a wide receiver, picks it up, and now he's trying to get it back, upfield, but he's going backwards. That's probably the most likely, a 2-point conversion where it's picked or quarterback's hit, fumbled, and you get a big return that starts heading down towards the other end zone. But then somehow there's a change of possession in the middle of the play, and the kicking team or the 2-point converting team picks it back up and then gets tackled in the end zone. 1 point to the defense. Now, if it happens the other way, 2-point conversion, gets picked, guy runs it out to the 15-yard line, then starts going backwards, and he gets tackled in his own end zone, then the offensive team or the team that was attempting the try gets awarded a point. But that team can't end up with 1 point in the game because they were attempting the conversion because they just scored a touchdown, which is worth 6 points. The picked off on a 2-point conversion, stripped from behind, offensive guy picks it up. He starts running around, gets chased, goes backwards, gets tackled in the end zone. 1 point. And if they don't score another point during the entirety of the game, they could end the game with 1 point. I never knew this. I bet most of you never knew this. Did you know that could happen, Max? It sounds like you did not.
No, I did not. It's very bizarre, and it's almost impossible, but
it's not impossible. It's highly unlikely.
But
there have been 13 1-point situations awarded, but they've all been awarded to the kicking team or the 2-point attempting team because of a block kick where a guy picked it up or an intercepted 2-point conversion and he went backwards into his own end zone. The other way is obviously highly unlikely, but it's possible. And I think the way that I described it, a kick gets blocked and the guy's running it back and he gets stripped, or it's a 2-point conversion and he picks it off and he's running down the field, he gets stripped, and then it's picked up by an offensive player. You have a change of possession. He goes backwards trying to avoid tacklers and gets hit and dropped in the end zone. That's the way it would happen. It's never happened. I wouldn't bet that it would ever happen. The odds are a long shot. But the fact that it's a possibility that an NFL game could end, 7-1 or 24-1, I never knew that to be a possibility. So thank you, Pete, for making me aware of that. I thought it would.
Sorry,
what?
This sounds like a season-long future that I would bet on every single year until.
Of course you would.
Yeah,
but they wouldn't post odds.
They would never.
Yeah. But one day, I guess if you live long enough, and look, given the number of 2-point attempts that we now have in the game, and the fact that the extra point now for 7 years or whatever it's been, 8 years now, maybe 10 years, is a longer extra point. It's an increased possibility from what it was before because we have more 2-point attempts and we've got a longer extra point. Than it was for the 50 years that this thing was on the books. But just, if somebody says, hey, is it possible for a team to end up with 1 point? Your immediate answer, most of you, would be no, it's impossible because the only way to get 1 point is to kick an extra point, and that comes after a touchdown. Well, who knew? I didn't. Thank you, Pete, in Potomac, for letting me know about that. All right, real quickly on the Nats, I did want to come back to it because I watched some of Mackenzie Gore because I saw it trending on Twitter. In fact, Grant tweeted something out after the game, and I think this is interesting. he, I think we've been talking about the very distinct possibility that the Nats have 2 All-Stars in James Wood and C.J. Abrams. In fact, I mean, I think those are locks at this point. But Grant suggested that Mackenzie Gore might be considered an All-Star as well. He has now a 2.87 ERA and leads Major League Baseball in strikeouts. So the Nats, could end up with 3 All-Stars this time next month, which is really quite amazing. But Mackenzie Gore has been lights out in his last 3 starts, in particular, lowering that ERA significantly, and he leads the bigs. He's got 108 strikeouts, 7 better than the pitcher who is number 2 in the league. And the Nats, we know, have, produced a lot more power than they did a year ago, a lot more offense. Last night, they didn't get anywhere near the amount of offense that they've been getting. They had that 4-game stretch against the Mariners and the Diamondbacks where they scored 9 runs in 3 consecutive games and 11 runs in the 4th game in that 4-game winning streak last year. But they are clearly better than anybody really guessed they would be. They're 3 games below 500. The problem is this. They just can't compete with the teams that have much bigger payrolls. And the problem with the Nats is that 2 of those big spending teams in the National League exist in their division, the Mets and the Phillies. And the Braves will spend as well. And the Nationals don't. They're overachieving right now. Through, at this point, 61 games with another 100 to go, 101 to go. The Nats are clearly overachieving at 29 and 32 and in 3rd place ahead of Atlanta. Atlanta, I know, has had many injuries, but, they're going to have to, as long as the Lerners own this team, they're going to have to just fight each year for one of those wild card spots, because winning a division against teams like the Mets and the Phillies, and to a lesser extent the Braves, year in and year out, with what they're willing to spend, is going to be difficult over 162. But to get to 84 or 85 and be a wild card team, and then we know what the MLB playoffs are every year. Crapshoot. Best, once you get into short series and it's nothing reflective of 162, anything can happen. But that really is sort of the Nats' future, unless they sell the team to somebody who would spend big. I was talking to a friend of mine before I was away for a while, and he's like, you had Ted on a couple of times, and we have had Ted on a couple of times. Ted's been very gracious with his time on 2 different occasions over the last, I think, 6 months or so to come on the show. And he said, you asked him at one point, would it be healthy for a sports market for an owner to end up owning 3 of the major 4 pro sports teams? And Ted thought that, and his answer was, I think that there would be a lot of synergy. There would be a lot of benefit to owning all 3, but that it was a legitimate question. You don't really have that anywhere. There isn't a market in which one owner owns 3 of the 4 professional sports teams. Stan Kroenke owns multiple teams in multiple markets, but not 3 in one market. And I think that there would be a bit of a conflict. Which of the 3 are you putting your emphasis in and year out? Do you have to rob Peter to pay Paul in certain years? I don't know that would be necessarily beneficial, but he went through an explanation. But my buddy said to me, and he's a big baseball guy and a big Nats guy, he said, I mean, the problem is, if it were the only team that Ted owned in town, would he be a big spender? This is the sport more than any where you have to have a big payroll. You have to think big. And that's, for me, a segue into the NBA Finals, which start tonight between Oklahoma City and Indiana. 2 small market NBA teams. 2 teams, one in particular, that have gone through some pain. Oklahoma City clearly, went with, and we have one of the people that made it happen, Will Dawkins, as the general manager of the Wizards. They went through the idea of accumulating picks and having two terrible seasons. And the Wizards have had two, and they're probably on their way to a third. But they went with, the quasi tanking strategy. They ended up being able to trade for a Shea Gilgeous-Alexander. They didn't draft him. But it was the environment in which they laid out in losing games and accumulating picks. And God, they have so many picks between now and 2030. It's sick. Oklahoma City looks so positioned to make a long run here over the next few years. But if, in the NBA, you can build it that way, do you have to think big in this sport? I'll give you my answer when we come back, and we'll talk a little NBA Finals with OKC and Indiana tipping it off in Game 1 tonight. We'll do that after these words from a few of our sponsors. You're listening to The Kevin Sheehan Show on the Team 980, the team980.com. You can also check us out on the Team 980 YouTube page. The number 47 market in the country is Oklahoma City. They will face off in game one tonight of the NBA Finals against the Indiana Pacers. Indianapolis is the 25th ranked market in the country. When you look at recent champions like Milwaukee and Denver, you start to get a different picture than the one that we used to have of the NBA, which was top heavy, big market, marquee market, consistent, performance by the big market teams, consistency in the teams that we see in the finals every year. No, we are now guaranteed to have a seventh consecutive year of a champion that has not won the championship in the previous 6 seasons. That started with the Lakers in 2020. Then we had the Bucks in 21, the Warriors in 22, the Nuggets in 23, and the Celtics last year with OKC and Indiana in a matchup. We're guaranteed to have a brand new champion, one that we have not seen, well, in the NBA ever, because neither one of these two teams has ever won an NBA championship. But it's amazing when you consider that this was Golden State versus Cleveland for 4 consecutive years, Miami Heat basically for 4 consecutive years against San Antonio and a group of other teams, including Oklahoma City back in 2012, Lakers, Celtics, Lakers, Spurs, Heat. We had the Pistons there for a few years. The league's changed. The league has changed, and it's something that the league wanted. They changed the way payroll worked. It was more strict payroll rules than it used to be. And for the past 10 to 15 years, the league has gotten much more parity. It's gotten much more competitive balance. I mean, the idea 10 years ago, 15 years ago, before a season started, oh yeah, we're going to see OKC and Indiana in the finals. No, you're not. It's not the way the league worked. It does now. So there is this belief with this matchup that now this gives every NBA market some hope. And it should, to a certain degree. It should give, markets like, and I'm talking about downtrodden markets over a long period of time, in the East, Charlotte, and of course, Washington. In the West, New Orleans. Washington's not a small market, but they are perceived to be small operation when it comes to the NBA. But this is going to give everybody hope. And that's a good thing. And the league has designed itself for more competitive balance. And what Oklahoma City in particular has been able to do with accumulating draft choices and using draft choices to make big trades. And obviously, moving on from Paul George and Russell Westbrook, these were big trades that brought in more hauls, and they were able to use some of the capital that they had to land a player that had the potential to be kind of a top 5-ish player in SGA. Just so you know, not only have they done an amazing job with the draft and then utilizing draft capital, accumulated draft capital and players to attract better players, they have over the next 5 drafts, 30 choices, 12 of which will come in the first round. Now, some of those are protected, lottery protected, top 5 protected, etc. So they may not end up getting them in that year, but 30 picks over the next 5 drafts, 12 of them in the first round. The Wizards have accumulated a lot of picks over the next 5 drafts as well. But one thing for me that hasn't changed until, further notice is that you can't win it all unless you have a legitimate superstar player. You've got to have a player that is arguably a top 5 player in the game to win the title. 2004, we've talked about this pretty much every year as we get to this time of year. 2004 was the last NBA championship team that did not include an obvious top 5 player. Chauncey Billups was not necessarily a top 5 player on that Pistons team that won in 2004. Rip Hamilton was not an obvious top 5 player. Rasheed Wallace, Ben Wallace, not obvious top 5. Okay, but since then, It's been a run of San Antonio with Duncan. The Heat, first of all, with Shaq and Wade when they won it in 2006. You had the Celtics with KG. You had the Lakers with Kobe. You had Dirk with the Mavericks. You had LeBron with the Heat. Back to Duncan, in San Antonio. Then, obviously the Golden State run with Steph. Cleveland sneaking in there with LeBron, Kawhi in 2019 in Toronto, LeBron back in with the Lakers 2020, Giannis with the Bucks in 21, Steph, then Jokic, and then Tatum last year. You have not seen since 2004. It's an amazing run of 20 years of a team win the NBA title without a player that was obviously in the conversation of being a top 5 player in the game. You have to have at least one superstar. You need more than that, but you have to have one true superstar. Now, if Indiana wins the title, they'll break that trend because I personally don't view Tyrese Halliburton, not yet anyway, as a top 5 player in the game. You might have an argument based on the way he's been playing in this postseason, the way he played last year. But this is a guy that hasn't even finished in the top 5 in NBA MVP voting. SGA would obviously be an example of a top 5 player. He won the MVP. By definition, that makes him a top 5 player in the league. Some of you would say, I don't really see Shai Gilgeous-Alexander as a top 5 player. I know what you're saying in some ways. He's really, really close. Like, he's not far off. If you're not a big SGA fan, you can't have him that far off from number 5. But he won the MVP. So he's certainly a debatable top 5 player. I don't view Halliburton that way. I think Halliburton is exceptional. I do. And I think, it's possible that over the next couple of years, we view Halliburton as a top 5 player. But it wouldn't change the fact that in the year that he won the title, if they were to win it, he was not a top 5 player. Sorry, but Tyrese Halliburton in 2024, 2025 is not a top 5 player. Just isn't. Really good player, all NBA player, but in my opinion, not top 5. I think we could go 7, 8 deep before we got to Tyrese Halliburton. He's got an odd game. By the way, so does SGA to a certain degree. But with all of the, talk about everybody now has a chance, there are lots of different ways to do it. Boston did it, last year with, by the way, drafted players, Tatum and Jaylen Brown for starters, but they added pieces along the way. Certainly Holiday and Porzingis were huge for Boston's title last year. The Nuggets drafted the perhaps best player in the NBA. I think you can certainly make a case year in and year out that Nikola Jokic is the best player. He didn't win MVP. He was runner-up this year. And I think, overall performance, I'm fine with Shai Gilgeous-Alexander winning it. Although if you told me that we're drafting for a team next year, there's no way I would take SGA before Jokic. But that's not really how, as we know, the MVP voting works year to year. But everybody has a much better chance than they used to. And the Wizards are pursuing the path that Oklahoma City pursued in many ways. They're not completely identical. They're not completely identical yet because maybe if the Wizards, someone were to say, Kevin, they're going to be in the NBA Finals in 3 years or 4 years. How did that happen? Did it happen with somebody that they picked? Or did it happen with the picks that they had that enabled them to acquire a player that they viewed a year or two away from superstardom, which is what Oklahoma City was able to do? But don't forget, their second best player and their third best player and their fourth best player and their fifth best player all drafted for Oklahoma City. And good God, that is a deep team. And that is a team, if they continue under Sam Presti, to draft well and to maneuver well, they are well positioned for a long-ass run. I mean, in part, they're well coached and they're incredible defensively. We'll get to thoughts on this series in a moment. The Wizards, are in that predicament that, some of the teams that have gotten there and gotten to the promised land, Denver, Oklahoma City, and Indiana this year, the Bucks back in 2021, even a team like Phoenix, although Phoenix is more attractive as well, Toronto back in 2019. They're in that, area of, okay, anybody can win it, but they got to get some of these picks right, and then they've got to utilize their picks to find somebody that is on the verge. And that's going to come down to keen talent evaluation. Sam Presti is exceptional. The Indiana front office, exceptional. Boston, exceptional. Everybody was giving Nico Harrison props last year. Denver has done a phenomenal job, although they were too thin this year, bench-wise. Giannis is, going to land somewhere outside of Milwaukee in this offseason. KD is probably going to end up somewhere else. I was thinking, about this couple of weeks ago when Milwaukee got eliminated. I'm like, I like the Wizards, what they're doing. Let's land on a superstar player, or let's utilize the capital, draft capital that they have to get that, player as he's on the verge of becoming a superstar, which is what Oklahoma City did in the acquisition of Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. I like this. This is a much better path than the path that they were on. But part of me is also like, there are no guarantees. It's just like these conversations about the Trey Hendrickson draft proposal that Seth Walder put out there. You're talking about a given versus unrealized, Johnny Newton and future picks. And wouldn't it be interesting if the Wizards just went all in, utilizing their draft capital? And they have the ability, with all of the ammo that they have, draft capital-wise, to make a big move, just to go in on Giannis and figure out a way to get KD here, and just go for it, rather than continue to grind this out and hope that the unrealized becomes realized. I don't think they'll do that. And I think the other part of this, for some reason, Washington has never, ever been a destination for players, whether it's cold weather, whether it's, steep taxes, very expensive, etc. There have just been so many more attractive situations. It could be part ownership in the way the Wizards have sort of operated as, a team that just is not perceived to be upper echelon. But then you look at Oklahoma City. But Oklahoma City and Indiana are two markets that care about their professional basketball teams. The Oklahoma City environment tonight, if you guys haven't seen it, you might be tuning in for the first time, it is collegiate. I mean, everybody will be, you get this in the Midwest. You don't get this, on the East Coast, where, they put the T-shirts out and we're going with a blue out, or we're going with a white out, or we're going with a gold out, or, a black out, or whatever it is, depending on the markets. You'll never see New Yorkers put on the T-shirts. You're not getting Sal from Queens to flip on the T-shirt that's hanging over the seat when he gets to his seat. And with all of the celebrities there, they're not putting on T-shirts. You get that in very collegiate atmospheres, and then at the professional level in the Midwest. Even I remember the Wizards games of 2015, 17, 14, when they were, decent, not an NBA contender, but they were winning playoff series. They won 3 playoff series over 4 years, and they were putting T-shirts out. And even in our, town, it was smattered, across the crowd. It's tough to get Boston, New York, DC to kind of comply to the, T-shirt thing. But tonight, what you'll see in Oklahoma City is a collegiate atmosphere that just, I don't know if it can be matched in the NBA. It is loud. It is electric. It's all they have. They've got college football and they've got the Thunder. And, in that neck of the woods, a lot of Cowboy fans. Now, as far as the series goes, Max and I will talk about that when we come back. I think there are a couple of keys for Indiana if they're going to make this a series, because Oklahoma City is one of the top 5 all-time biggest favorites in NBA Finals history. I think justifiably so. We'll preview it and we'll pick it when we come back. Kevin Sheehan Show, the Team 980 and the Team980.com.
All right, the Baltimore Ravens have signed Rashad Bateman to a contract extension, a 3-year, $36.7 million contract extension that includes $20 million in guarantees. GM Eric DaCosta also said that they are in the introductory stages of an extension for 2023 MVP Lamar Jackson. The Pittsburgh Penguins have hired Rangers assistant coach Dan Muse as their next head coach. This hire follows rumors that Caps assistant head coach Mitch Love was a top candidate for the job, and the Oilers, they close out the Panthers in an overtime thriller. They win 4-3. Leon Draisaitl skates it off with the OT winner. The Nats, they shut down the Cubs by a score of 2-0. Mackenzie Gore with 7 innings pitched, 7 strikeouts, only giving up 3 hits and 0 earned runs. They'll continue their series tonight. Jake Irvin expected to take the mound. Nats on deck with Charlie and Dave at 6:15 on 106.7 The Fan. First pitch at 6:45. This update is sponsored by the Team 980 YouTube page. Just open the app, type in the Team 980, and hit subscribe. Kevin Sheehan is live from 10 to 1 and Craig Hoffman from 4 to 7. Don't forget to like the stream and turn on notifications to stay up to date on all things DC sports. And that is what's trending.
That's what we're gonna get. That's what we're gonna get next year. With NBC
exciting.
back in the catbird seat with the NBA Finals. I think NBC will have the NBA Finals, right? And ESPN will just do a lot of the playoffs. I
think
forget
they
how that's going to work.
Yeah, I don't know.
I'm pretty sure NBC is going to be back in the NBA Finals business next year. I think that's true. All right, look, the matchup tonight, and if you want to weigh in, we're going to try to take calls on the NBA Finals. 301-230-0980, 301-230-0980. Who do you like and why? In how many games, etc. So, a couple of things to know about this matchup. Oklahoma City is better, and they're much better, actually. Their margin of victory during the course of the season was the largest in NBA history. 12.9 points per game was their margin of victory. They won 68 games during the regular season. They set the record so far in the postseason with the most 30-point-plus wins with 4. They're the best defensive team we've seen in the postseason in years, and they are easily the best defensive-rated team in the postseason to date by a large margin. The numbers for hustle stats like deflections and steals and turnovers forced, this is one of the best defensive teams you will ever watch play basketball. And they are deep. And everybody on the floor at any given time, including their center, Chet Holmgren, can guard any position 1 through 5. That's what makes them so great. It's part of the reason they're so great. They are individually great defenders. They have an incredible sense of team defense. 1 pass away, 2 passes away, how to play it. They anticipate well. And then as on-ball defenders, they are relentless and physical. Now, with that said, Indiana is a great offensive basketball team. And when they play fast, they are impossible to stop. And that is the key to this series. I like Oklahoma City to win these NBA Finals, and that's hardly going out on a limb. They are somewhere between a -700 and -800 favorite. It's top 5-ish all time in terms of how big of a favorite they are in these NBA Finals. And I think it's justifiable. I think based on what they were during the regular season and what they did, in the 2 series. Look, they went to a 7th game against Denver. That just tells you, by the way, how great Jokic is and how great Murray was too. That Denver forced Oklahoma City to a 7th game. And interestingly about that series, Denver had games 4 and 5 within reach of winning and really should have snagged one of those, which may have made the ultimate outcome different. I mean, if it would have. We don't know how things would have played out had Denver taken a 3-1 series lead. But when they were up 2-1 in that series, they had a chance, and a good chance, with a 7-point lead in the 4th quarter to take a 3-1 series lead at home. And then they had a very good chance to win Game 5. Denver was phenomenal in that series. Of course, they also have the greatest player in the game, you can argue, in Nikola Jokic. But OKC got through that. And a lot of the questions going into this postseason, because of their margin of victory, was how are they going to perform in close games? Well, they didn't. In Game 2 against Denver, they got beat at home. Game 1 against Denver, they got beat at home. And there were other close calls that they did get through. But they didn't have a lot of close games. Again, 4 30-point-plus wins in the postseason. But Indy has to play fast. They have to take the basketball out of the net or off the glass, off the rim, and they have to play fast. That is the key to this series. If they can play fast, we could see some 135, 131 games, and it would be highly entertaining. But they average, listen to this, 73.5% of the time, Indy gets the ball past half court with still 20.4 seconds on average left on the shot clock. That's pretty unbelievable in terms of them playing fast. Now, how do they play fast against a team like Oklahoma City? Well, they have to get stops. The easiest way to play fast is to get stops, rebounds, turnovers. All right. And they've got to rebound. You cannot run if you can't rebound. Now, they do a great job, and they did a really good job against the Knicks. My God, in Game 6, it was embarrassing how many times Indiana took the ball after a made shot and had a dunk or a layup on the other end. I really, we talked a little bit about Tibbs getting fired. I kind of saw it coming. I thought they were very poorly coached in the series against Indiana, completely outwitted by Carlisle. It is sinful to give up 6 buckets in transition after a made bucket, and that's what they did in an elimination game. That's coaching. You've got to have your players understand we have to get back on defense. So Oklahoma City will have no problem getting back on defense. But if you turn the ball over, or if you get, if you get stopped a lot, that's the best opportunity. Indiana has to get stops, and then you got to rebound. To be able to play fast, to be able to get out, they'll push it after a made bucket, but really you have to get stops, and you've got to rebound. It's an old adage that is mostly true. You want to run, you better get stops and rebound. Now, I think the key there will be offensive rebounding. They've got to keep Oklahoma City off the glass. Oklahoma City does a great job with second chance points. They've got to rebound. You can't run if you can't rebound. You can't run if you don't get stops, other than what they did against New York, and I don't see a lot of that coming. Both of these teams are very much into the possession game. Both take care of the basketball. And by the way, both teams have done a really good job in this postseason capitalizing off of turnovers forced against the other team. I don't have the numbers on this, and I was looking for them. Indiana did a nice job in their wins against New York of forcing turnovers, but God, I thought so many of those turnovers were not necessarily forced. I'm not saying that they didn't play great defense, because I thought Indiana played outstanding defense, but the Knicks, because they were so stagnant offensively, they basically were unforced turnovers in a lot of those situations. And I talked about Jalen Brunson yesterday. I'm not a Jalen Brunson guy. You can have him. He's a phenomenally skilled player, an incredible scorer, shooter. Part of it shouldn't be on him. A coach should not allow him to play the way he plays. And to put as much on him to carry a team. You cannot, in my opinion, and we've not seen an example of it yet. Maybe we will next year or the year after. We're not going to see it this year, because neither one of these two teams in the finals are ISO teams. I just don't think you can win 4 out of 7 in 4 straight series playing the way the Knicks play offensively with Jalen Brunson. I think if Jalen Brunson is your best player, you've got no shot to win the title. That's my personal belief. If you've got Shai Gilgeous-Alexander as your best player, you got a shot to win the title. But he's got a great supporting cast. To me, this is going to all come down to, can Indiana play fast? And for them to play fast, they're going to have to get stops and rebounds and force turnovers. And I just don't see that being something that they can do extremely well 4 times over 7 games. I like Oklahoma City, hardly going out on a limb here. Their team is so deep, and Indiana's impressive too. This is a much better matchup. For those that haven't paid attention to the NBA Finals, this is a much better matchup than what we would have seen Oklahoma City against the Knicks. The Knicks would have been a long shot, I think, to even win a game against Oklahoma City. Now, I say that in Minnesota, routed Oklahoma City in Game 3. I mean, that was like they didn't show up for that game. But Minnesota was a better team than the Knicks were throughout the season. Oklahoma City's so deep, guys. I mean, they've got a superstar in SGA. They've got a star in Jalen Williams, another one in Chet Holmgren. Isaiah Hartenstein is just an absolute beast on the glass. Lou Dort is like honestly, he's like Frankie Louvu on a basketball court. He is just one of the more physical linebacker-looking dudes that can move defensively. He is, as an on-ball defender, if you've ever played hoops at any level, he's the guy that if you walk out there and he comes over and says, "I've got you," you're like, "Oh, Christ. I don't want him guarding me." Then they got Jalen Williams off the bench. Alex Caruso might be their best defender. He comes off the bench. Isaiah Joe can play. Aaron Wiggins, Terp fans, has had a great season. Now, he's really not gotten it going during the postseason. He actually didn't play a lot of minutes over their last few games. Cason Wallace, unbelievable. They've got guys that everybody guards. It's so impressive to watch. And then they have so many ways to hurt you. They spread the ball moves offensively, and if they get into a position where you've got to go at the end of a shot clock to ISO, they've got one of the best shot creators and one of the most clever shot creators. And by the way, one of the best at drawing fouls in Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. That will be something you'll hear a lot about. You know, he is a foul merchant, they call him. It's crafty. We've seen it with the best players in the history of the game. They're able to draw fouls and get to the free throw line. I just don't see Indiana being anywhere in the class of Oklahoma City, top to bottom, but much better matchup than the Knicks would have provided. Tyrese Halliburton is special, and I will tell you, I've been a Pascal Siakam fan since he was in Toronto, and he is legit. Neesmith can go on heaters. Miles Turner can really stretch the floor, defend. Nembhard is very sort of hit and miss. Obi Toppin comes off the bench. Thomas Bryant, remember Thomas Bryant here in Washington? He had a phenomenal game 6 in their closeout game. I think he had double figures offensively. TJ McConnell, man, good God, is he good? I mean, he is a phenomenal backup point guard. Ben Mathurin, not a big fan of his overall demeanor on the court, but he is a shot creator. They're good too. They're really good. Ben Shepherd can really stretch it. Bradley plays. He'll guard people. This is a better matchup. I don't think Indiana gets blanked. I think they'll win a game, in this series, maybe 2, but not 3 or 4. Oklahoma City, 4 games to 2. Ultimately, Indiana has to really push their fast style of play. And to do that, they're going to have to get consistent stops. They're going to also have to rebound. They're going to have to force some turnovers. And by the way, that just doesn't count how I think Oklahoma City can take a lot out of them physically when they're on offense, when they're forced to run half-court offense. Oklahoma City wears you out. That's another reason why Indiana has to play fast. Because if they get into having to run a lot of half-court offense, man, Oklahoma City takes it out of you. And then you just wear down. You saw it in the Denver series. You saw it in the Minnesota series. The Knicks just couldn't do that to Indiana. They're just not good enough defensively to kind of wear them down. And then they just did such a crappy job with transition defense. I like Oklahoma City in 5, 4 games to 1. I don't see this going any further than 6 games. Max will give you his prediction. And if you want to weigh in, who do you like? Oklahoma City or Indiana, and how many games? Why you like that team? Why not? 301-230-0980. It's the Kevin Sheehan Show on the Team 980, the team980.com. We're also free and live on the Odyssey app, and you can check us out on the Team 980 YouTube page. NBA Finals tonight. Who do you like and in how many games? 301-230-0980. Maybe the question also to add to that, with phone lines open at 301-230-0980, is are you going to watch? Does this interest you at all? I have a really strong sense that this interests the minority of listeners to this particular show and this station, and basically most sports talk stations around the country. This is not an anticipated NBA Finals matchup. Two small market teams. Look, I'm into it. I like the NBA playoffs. I don't like the NBA playoffs. I love the NBA playoffs. I've invested here over a month and a half, 2 months, whatever it's been at this point. I guess it's been about a month and a half of watching this, every night and lots of afternoons on weekends. And I'm looking forward to the matchup. I definitely, as we went through the conference finals, I did not want to see the Knicks in the NBA Finals. This is a much more attractive matchup. The Pacers have a chance. They have a chance because they can really score. They got great shooters. They got great scorers. They play at a very fast pace. They have a chance to be competitive, but I just think Oklahoma City is one of the best defensive teams we've ever seen, one of the deepest teams we've seen in recent memory. And defensively, it's not just their starters. They essentially have 9 guys that whichever 5 of the 9 are on the floor, they can guard 1 through 5. They can guard all 5 positions, and they do it very effectively. 301-230-0980 for you guys that are thinking about watching the NBA playoffs. Who do you like and why? Or are you just not interested in these NBA playoffs? And you can explain why as well at 301-230-0980. I like OKC in 5 games. I think we'll have, an Indiana win in this series. I think we'll have a couple of games that will be wildly entertaining. And when I say wildly entertaining, I'm talking about, 138, 136. I mean, we're going to see a game like that. But I also think we are going to see 117 to 103, 126 to 106 a few times with OKC on top. Max, who do you like?
It's tough. I really want to do the contrarian thing and bet the Pacers to win the finals because the value is pretty good, but so are the Thunder. The Thunder are they're so deep, like you said, defensively, they'll put you in hell. But the Pacers, it's interesting because guys have got to step up for them. Like Nesmith, like he did last series, he hit 53% of his threes. Like he needs to continue that, however unlikely that may be. Halliburton needs to kind of respond to how he performed in the Knicks series. I still, it's just going to be the Thunder in 5 or 6. I think the Pacers will steal at least 1. They could steal 2, but I don't see it going past 6 games, much like you.
The Thunder tonight are 9.5-point favorites in game 1. It's the second largest game 1 spread in the NBA Finals since the Lakers and Sixers in 2001. By the way, in that particular game, Allen Iverson went for 41, I think it was, and the Sixers shocked the Lakers in game 1 as a big underdog. So we'll see. The Thunder at 9.5-point favorites in game 1 and massive favorites in this series. As I've mentioned, this is, odds maker wise, this is a potential beatdown in the making. The 2001 76ers were the biggest underdog in NBA Finals history, at least since 1980. And then you had the Cavs in 2018, the Sonics in 96, the Knicks in 99, and then the Pacers this year in 2025. So big underdog are the Pacers, big favorite are the Thunder. And going to be a hard challenge. By the way, I wanted to talk real quickly because I I did catch this. I didn't watch this start to finish last night. I think a lot of, hockey fans in this market are Caps fans primarily. I know some of you are into the NHL playoffs once they end. But how about game one last night in Edmonton?
Cinema.
The crowd was incredible. The game was incredible. It went to overtime last night. Draisaitl, the guy that didn't he lead the league in goals during the regular season? He may lead the playoffs in goals. Gets the overtime winner. Do you have that call?
Of course, I have the call. Here,
let me hear it.
Let's take a listen.
Now to Nugent Hopkins. Kicks it back to Bouchard. Back to Nugent Hopkins. McDavid. It's gone! Scores! Leon Draisaitl, Game 1 hero.
That was off of a pass from Connor McDavid, who is really, really special. I'm not a hockey guy, but I notice number 97 on the ice. He looks different than everybody else does. I did not watch this start to finish, but I did watch probably half of the game. And like was the case in the series against Carolina in the Eastern Conference Finals, I found myself thinking and watching the game, and I'm looking through kind of the final stats of this game. I'm assuming you watched it, Max, start to finish. I really felt like when I was watching it, Florida had that ice tilted a lot of the time. Yeah. Am I right about that or not?
You're absolutely right. They were keeping the pressure on Skinner for a good bit of it. And that's the thing about the Oilers is that they can just flip it on you like that, like so quickly. And once they establish and kind of find their zone and find their game, they're a very hard team to stop. So that it's going to be a great series. I'm very excited to see how many games it goes. And overtime winner game 1. That's a great start.
Do we go, by the way, back and forth? We don't have any of these nights where you get the NBA Finals and the NHL Finals on the same night.
I hope not. It should be every other night. I'm going to quickly verify that on the Real app. Because
the NHL, I'm looking at right now, they play game 2 Friday night, and then they don't play again until Monday. They don't play on Saturday or Sunday. The NBA goes game 1 tonight and then game 2 Sunday night. Back, still in OKC. And then you go Wednesday night in Indiana, Friday night in Indiana. And then remember, we're not in the 2-3-2 anymore in the NBA finals. It's been a few years since we've been 2-3-2. It's 2-2-1-1-1. In the NHL finals, it's 2-3-2, right?
No, it's 2-2-1-1-1.
It is.
Yeah.
Okay. Wow, man. Think about the Stanley Cup finals, Florida and Edmonton. I know it's year 2 for them. And in the NBA Finals, Pacers and Thunder, OKC and Indianapolis. I know that the Florida Panthers are in South Florida, big market, obviously, but still, we don't have marquee of anything in June of 2025, but, should be competitive in the NHL Stanley Cup Finals. All right, when we come back, I think you guys remember Mike North, who jumped on with us before the schedule came out. We talked to him about the whole process, about how this year would be different in putting together Washington's schedule. So a week and a half ago, I had him, right before I took some time off, I had him on the podcast, and I wanted you guys to hear it on the radio show. He's so good at explaining how it was put together. You're going to hear him go through the challenges that they had in putting the Washington schedule together. He's going to tell you the game that was on the schedule for Washington's opener for a long period of time until it got swapped out for the Giants on opening day. You'll hear a lot of what went into the NFL schedule and specific to the putting together of Washington's schedule with schedule maker Mike North when we come back. Kevin Sheehan Show, the Team 980 and the Team980.com. Joining me right now, and I promised that I would try to make this happen after he came on with us in mid-April, about a month before the schedule came out. You guys really enjoyed Mike North and the conversation we had that day, and he's kind enough to come back now that the schedule is official. Mike North, the Vice President of NFL Broadcast Planning and Scheduling. He's been doing this for 3 decades, is one of the key people involved in putting together the NFL schedule. And when you came on with me in mid-April, you said, look, there are 272 of these assets, and every year there are like 10 to 20 that are obviously going to be sought after, and that for the first time in a long time, Washington was actually going to be a participant in some of those 10 to 20 high exposure spots. So that's where I want to start. I mean, you weren't lying. 5 prime times, 3 standalones, which include Madrid Christmas Day and Week 16 on a Saturday. Some of their 425 games look like, to much of the country games as well. Mike, what were some of the, big memorable decisions, discussions around Washington's schedule that you can share with us?
Yeah, good to talk to you again, Kev. Look, the truth is we kind of knew, like we said, a month or so ago that we were going to be leaning into the Commanders maybe a little bit more than we had in recent years. Part of it, obviously, just due to the schedule, right? All the NFC East games matter. Throw out the records. Those division games mean something. We're crossing over this year into, Green Bay, Detroit, Chicago. Those are all interesting. And then obviously crossing over into the NFC West and picking up 3 playoff teams out there, Denver, Chargers, Kansas City. So a lot of good inventory to choose from, a lot more mouths to feed. I'm sure we talked about this a month ago, just so many more national windows, so many more standalone games than we've ever had. So you're probably leaning in, maybe 1 or 2 more for everybody. And, at the top end, there's only so many games you can put, Dallas, Kansas City, and Green Bay in big windows. And at the bottom end, there's some teams that are still kind of either playing their way back into form, back into prime time, rebuilding, drafting at the top of the draft, whatever. So you kind of look at that kind of middle tier, and you look at a Washington, a Chicago, a Minnesota, a Seattle, a Baltimore. Those are the teams that are going to be well represented, maybe 1 or 2 more than most people thought, but product of both the record from last year, the deep playoff run to the championship game, and again, obviously the schedule, the opponents really helped dictate the choices we made.
All right, let me ask you about a couple of the decisions. When we talked back in mid-April, you thought Washington would get significant consideration for kickoff. Why Dallas and not, Washington or the Rams or a couple of the other teams that Philly had on the schedule? Why not Washington for the opener?
Could have gone with any of the Eagles' home opponents, really.
Right.
Like you said, Rams, Denver would have been interesting, Chicago, Detroit, obviously Washington. There was one school of thought that, the last time we saw Washington and Philly play each other wasn't really that close. But, you add Debo, you make some moves in the offseason. It's a different team. It's a different game. Absolutely considered Washington for kickoff. It really came down to, we probably haven't gotten maximum use, maximum value out of the 2 Dallas-Philly games the last couple of years. You remember last year we had one of them in December in a standalone window on Fox at 4:25. We ended up flexing it back to 1 o'clock. Like that Dallas-Philly series, those 2 games are usually top 5, top 6, top 8 every year, and we just really haven't gotten maximum value out of them. So nobody knows what the Cowboys are going to be. Obviously, see if Dak can stay healthy, new coach. But certainly one of those Dallas-Philly games, get it in early, get it in the bank, get a maximum fan value, if you will, out of it. And you just know the Eagles fans are going to love unfurling a banner in front of the Cowboys. So put that one in nice and early, and that lets you save the other Philly-Washington games. You hinted one of them is in Week 16, standalone national window on that Saturday, that 3rd Saturday in December, where the NFL's been playing for decades. So a couple of good division games there in Philly-Wash and Green Bay-Chi. And then we saved Philly-Wash, the other end, for Week 18. We kind of got in a rut here these last few years where it was just Dallas, Washington, and Philly Giants over and over and over again. So good to mix that up a little bit too. So knowing one of the Philly Washingtons was going to be in Week 18, the other one should be on Fox. so probably couldn't be the kickoff game. So round and around we go. All these decisions are intertwined, and they all kind of impact each other. And that's really how, I don't want to say we backed into Dallas Philly because we liked it, but we looked at all the other options. This one felt like the right move.
You know, I'm going to go to the end of the schedule quickly because you just brought it up. That was the one thing that I was curious about, because I just thought that these Week 18 matchups, there is risk there, right? That the game may not be meaningful for both teams. And I just thought that the Philadelphia, Washington, both of those games, you'd want to lock both of them in as less risk, high reward on the matchup being a massive matchup.
Yeah, look, I'd make the same argument for both ends of the Dallas-Washington series,
sure,
too, right? So,
yep.
And somebody's going to play, Washington in Week 18. If it's the Giants, then you're talking about Philly-Dallas as the other NFC East game in Week 18. And like we said, I'm not sure that's the best use of that. So most of this really had to do with the last couple of years. I think it's been 3 years in a row that we've played Dallas-Washington in Week 18. It was
3 in a row, yep.
And those are kind of the games we remember. And if somebody really is playing for something, there's a division title on the line, there's a playoff spot on the line, we probably ought to have a little bit of variety in Week 18. So figured it was time to kind of mix those up a little bit. That kind of pushed us into Dallas, Giants, and Washington, Philly. And that way you get both ends of Dallas, Washington in other television windows. So round and around we go. Hopefully all the NFC East games are going to matter this year. And, like you said, the one Dallas-Washington game's up a Fox doubleheader in October, and the other one's on Christmas. So we're counting on that series to mean something, too.
Yeah, no, that made sense, and it's kind of the way I explained it. It kind of put more emphasis on, look, the two Dallas-Philly properties, and what you just added to it, one of those games getting flexed out of a big window last year, that it just ended up being a little bit more of a priority than the second Philly-Washington game. We're playing division games in Week 18, and if it wasn't going to be Dallas, it had to be the Giants or Philly, and if it were the Giants, that meant Philly was playing Dallas. That makes sense. But you agree, right, that Week 18 is always a risk, that the games, may not mean that much.
Well, you can see how much we're thinking about it with all the talk coming out of Minneapolis last week with the playoff reseeding idea. It's not even just about who's hosting wild card and divisional round games. It's about how we ensure that the Week 16, 17, 18 games are meaningful. Well, what did we have last year? 8 or 9 teams resting starters or at least resting quarterbacks going into that final weekend of the season. That's probably not good for the league, not good for the product. So, yeah, your point is well taken. You want games in Week 18 that are going to matter, but you don't want to run the risk of taking one of your really premium assets, and by the time you get there, it's no longer relevant, and you kind of wasted it. So usually don't see our biggest divisional matchups in Week 18, kind of like you were hinting. If you want to get both Dallas-Washington and both Dallas-Phillies in earlier in the year, well, that only leaves Dallas-Giants for Week 18, and with that obviously comes Philly-Wash.
How much did Washington get in terms of conversation about a primetime spot in Week 1, either Sunday night or Monday night?
A lot. There's a couple of factors at play there. One of them, obviously, in the mix for kickoff, like we talked about. The other one is, what we're asking of our friends from NBC that opening weekend. We know they're going to be in Philadelphia on Thursday, and they've got to get to a game 3 days later on Sunday. I'm not sure they can hustle out and get to San Francisco or Los Angeles or Seattle. So there's a limited range of how far they can get their production trucks on a weekend where they have 2 games. Same thing you see on Thanksgiving. That's part of the reason why Washington's hosting Sunday night at Thanksgiving, because we ended up Thursday night in Baltimore.
Right.
Pretty sure they can get the trucks from Baltimore to Washington. We definitely talked about getting the trucks from Philly on Thursday to Washington on Sunday night. We absolutely looked at it for Monday night. There was it Chicago? I think it might have been Chicago. I think it was Chicago, Washington that we saw for a long time on Monday Night Football in Week 1, and that would have been really fun with the 2 young quarterbacks and all the off-season storylines there. As it spun around and around and around, we ended up with, saving. Oh, I'll tell you what was probably the bigger impact. It's Week 2. Right? If we're going to do Washington-Green Bay on Thursday night of Week 2 and use that as our Amazon opener, you probably can't then use the Commanders on Sunday night or Monday night of Week 1 and shorten an already short week. So once we started seeing Washington-Green Bay, getting our friends from Amazon a chance to go to Lambeau, which they love, and look, everybody else gets a week 1 game, right? Amazon has to wait until week 2 before they finally get to join the party. So, they always want a big one. They're going to be pointing to it for the next 5 months. Having that Washington Green Bay there in week 2 felt really good for Amazon, and it probably ended up costing us a Sunday night or a Monday night slot for Washington in week 1.
Real quickly on Thursday Night Football, wasn't there a rule there for a few years that every team had to play at least one short week game, even if it was a Thanksgiving Day game? And I think there are 3 teams that don't play on Thursday this year.
There was a rule. It wasn't even that every team had to play a short week game. It was actually, the rule was no team could play more than one. And so as we were building out between Thanksgiving and Christmas and an expanded Amazon package now that includes Black Friday and Thursdays all year long, we kind of ran out of games. We ran out of team appearances. So we had to pass a rule. Ownership voted and passed a rule that said, okay, a few teams a year could play more than one short week Thursday. Once you had the opportunity to put a couple of teams on the Thursday package more than once, that did open up the opportunity, if we wanted, to leave a couple of teams off. And the commissioner always talks about this like our version of relegation. Like, you got to play your way into these primetime windows. So we no longer have a rule that everybody gets a primetime game. And you can make a case that, while some teams are playing multiple short week games, the teams that are drafting near the top of the draft, they're not playing any short week Thursday games. That might actually help them. And it kind of is consistent with how we do things around here when you draft in reverse order and the worst records get the best free agent pickups. And same thing here, the teams that didn't really perform the way they had hoped to last year probably don't end up being represented multiple times on the primetime schedule, short weeks. So I think there's actually 6 teams that don't have a short week at all this year. So those 6 have the luxury of, the routine every week, Sunday to Sunday to Sunday, while the others, one of the benefits or challenges of success on the field means a pretty non-routine, non-usual schedule the next year. And that's what you're seeing with a team like Washington now.
I mean, Pete Rozelle wanted so much for it to be a league of parity, and it is a league that changes incredibly, not just year to year, but week to week almost. But at the same time, and I always point this out, we probably just had one of the top 2 dynasties with the Patriots of all time, and it was back-to-back, sort of 2 separate iterations of the dynasty.
It's remarkable, really, when you think about it, right?
Yeah.
Everything we do in this league
is designed for that not to happen.
Right? And they had a 20-year run. It was pretty remarkable, no doubt.
Well, I used to, in talking about our own team here during those dismal 24 years of Dan Snyder, I would say the league is designed for a team like ours that is even horrendously owned to occasionally have like an 11-5 or 12-4 season. But even Washington couldn't accomplish that, even though the system is designed for it. All right. What about Brazil? Was Washington, I remember talking to you in mid-April, and it sounded like Washington was much more of a possibility for kickoff than for Brazil. Why not Brazil and the Chargers?
It was interesting, actually, when you talk to the Chargers, they knew they were going to Brazil, and there's always this kind of give and take back and forth between the teams and the league office as to which one of our home opponents this year kind of makes sense for us to use internationally. And the Chargers were really focused on the fact that, Washington goes out to LA to play the Chargers, once every 8 years, really. I mean, depending on how the rotation goes with the standings based game, you're talking about once every 8 years. So for Commanders fans in Southern California, I think the Chargers were pretty sensitive about taking that game away from them. And like, to your point, that fan base has been maybe a little dormant for a few years. Like, now they're relevant again and they care. And I think the Chargers were thinking about the Southern California Commanders fans. If they miss a chance to see Washington this year, if they miss a chance to see Minnesota this year, then they may not see them again for 8 years. Whereas if it's the Chiefs, well, you saw them last year, you'll see them next year. They come to SoFi every year. So I think on the one hand, from a fan friendliness, ticket selling standpoint, that was one thing the Chargers were thinking about. I think the other thing was, Washington coming to SoFi, pretty long trip. Right? So they're already going to be making a long trip out to SoFi. Why play a team that's going to have to travel all the way to California and you both end up with a long trip? I think the Chargers are probably thinking more along the lines of, hey, look, if we've got to go whatever it is, 10 hours in the air to go play in Brazil. Maybe it wouldn't be so bad if one of our division opponents had that same set of challenges this year. So I think there was a little bit of ticketing and fan friendliness and revenue, but also I think a lot of it had to do with, what's happening on the field. I believe the Chargers think they're going to be competing for a Super Bowl this year. So if you put a little extra wrinkle in the Chiefs schedule, well, I'm sure the Chargers wouldn't be too disappointed with that.
That's interesting because just the whole idea, I think we all as NFL fans know the Chargers are not necessarily that popular in LA, and they end up almost, in a neutral, stadium environment. It sometimes almost feel like a road team at home. But when you get a team like Washington that hasn't been out there with a rejuvenated fan base, you can fill it up with a lot of the opponent's fans. Look, that's what Snyder, eventually had to count on, was the opponent's fans to fill up FedEx Field.
Yeah, I remember a Monday night game against the Steelers and just an awful lot of black and gold in there. It happens, yeah.
Yeah, that was one of the first in what we called the FedEx takeovers. So you had mentioned to me, and sort of it had implied that it was maybe a Madrid and Christmas, or just Thanksgiving, no Madrid, no Christmas. So you ended up with Washington and Madrid against Miami, and on Christmas, no Thanksgiving. So how close of a call was it between those two, scenarios?
The Thanksgiving and Christmas are actually intertwined in the sense, like we said, you can't play more than 2 short weeks in a season. And both, obviously, Thanksgiving and Christmas falling on a Thursday this year. If you're playing one of those, you're not playing the other one because you got to get on Amazon somewhere. A team like Washington made the playoffs, went to the NFC Championship game. Amazon's looking for a Washington appearance, if not 2. So you knew they were going to be on Amazon somewhere on a short week Thursday. Like we said, it ended up being the opener up in Lambeau. So they were only going to be Thanksgiving or Christmas for their second short week Thursday. So those were a little intertwined. The Thanksgiving actually wasn't really decided until kind of late in the process when we decided to go with KC Dallas. We've got such a good mix of the 272 this year, so much quality, so much depth, just the way the divisions rotate through each other, that you could afford to take a game like Kansas City Dallas, arguably the number 1 game of the year, and put it in a window where we normally wouldn't go that big. I mean, you remember Washington into Dallas a couple of years ago, Giants into Dallas, I think 2 of the last 3 years. Those are still doing 40, 41, 42 million viewers. We know where the floor is for Thanksgiving. I'm not sure we've ever really tested the ceiling. So Kansas City, Dallas is going to test the ceiling. If everybody's healthy and both teams are relevant, you could be talking about 48, 49, 50 million people watching a regular season NFL game. That's incredible and something that I think everybody's pretty excited about. So that sort of took Thanksgiving off the table a little bit. We kicked around Black Friday, though. That was certainly an option. But like we said, we ended up using Washington that weekend for NBC so they can do Baltimore and Washington, have a nice little easy doubleheader for themselves. And that enabled then that second short week for Christmas. And what do any of us know? Week 17, who's playing for what? So you see Christmas, all division games. One way or another, those division games are going to matter. And that's going to be, hopefully, the greatest streaming day ever. 2 games on Netflix and 1 on Amazon that night. They all had to be comparable. They all had to be good, and they all had to be relevant. Who knows? We got pretty lucky last year picking our 4 teams playing that Saturday to Wednesday Christmas round robin. Everybody was relevant. Everybody was healthy. Everybody made the playoffs. I hope our crystal ball is as clear again. But one way to ensure the games are going to matter one way or another, make them division games.
I guess that Dallas, Detroit, and Kansas City are both on Thanksgiving and Christmas. That's why Dallas and Detroit play on Amazon a week after Thanksgiving, right?
You got it.
And then Kansas City, plays the Amazon game on Christmas night?
You got it.
Okay.
So everybody gets a taste, right? It's just doling out. If you're Amazon and you're telling me, all right, I'm getting Kansas City late in the year, boy, I hope they're still relevant. I hope they haven't clinched. I hope Mahomes is healthy. I'm getting my 1 Dallas and my 1 Detroit in week 14, that week right after Thanksgiving. That's also in December. Like, that's an awful lot of really big brands that I don't get to see if I'm Amazon until after Thanksgiving. All the more reason then to put a Washington Green Bay in early, to put a Philly Giants in early, to put a Pittsburgh Cincy in early, try to make sure that they've got depth and quality throughout their entire schedule and not just backloaded with their biggest brands.
All right, let's take a quick break, and when we come back, more with Mike North, including whether or not he has any regrets about how the schedule turned out. We'll get to that and more after these words from a few of our sponsors.
All right, the Baltimore Ravens have signed Rashad Bateman to a contract extension that is 3 years, $36.75 million contract that includes $20 million in guarantees. Ravens GM Eric DeCosta also said that they are in the introductory stages of an extension for 2023 MVP Lamar Jackson. The Pittsburgh Penguins have hired Rangers assistant coach Dan Muse as their next head coach. This hire follows rumors that Caps assistant coach Mitch Love was a top candidate for the job. In the NHL last night, the Oilers, they closed out the Panthers in an overtime thriller. They win 4-3. Leon Draisaitl skates it off with the overtime winner with a pass coming from Connor McDavid. The Nats, they shut out the Cubs by a score of 2-0. Mackenzie Gore, with 7 innings pitched and 7 strikeouts, he only gave up 3 hits and no earned runs. They'll continue their series tonight. Jake Irvin expected to take the bump. Nats on deck with Charlie and Dave at 6:15 on 106.7 The Fan. This update is sponsored by the Team 980 YouTube page. Just open the app, type in the Team 980 and hit subscribe. Kevin Sheehan is live from 10 to 1 and Craig Hoffman from 4 to 7. Don't forget to like the stream and turn on notifications to stay up to date on all things DC sports. And that's what's trending.
We continue with Mike North, VP of Broadcast Planning and Scheduling for the NFL. Mike has been involved in putting the NFL schedule together for 3 decades. So one of the things that I was surprised at, and the only reason I was surprised at it, last year, because of the Wednesday Christmas games, you guys had to play Saturday. And there was a comment, and I forget from who it came, but it was, we don't want to go up against college football's first round in the, the triple header that they have, but we have no choice this year because we can't go Sunday to Wednesday. And yet this year, Christmas is on a Thursday and you're going to play 2 games on Saturday. So I guess college football's big day of that first round with home fields, et cetera, triple header, the NFL at this point, they've taken over Black Friday. They've got a Friday in September, and the playoff just doesn't play into your scheduling process.
It does. I mean, we're friends. We're cooperate. We've been met with General Clark and the CFP folks multiple times. We're pretty good to them. You know, they play a lot of their bowl games and a lot of their championship games in our buildings, whether it's in Atlanta or Miami or Indianapolis or Los Angeles or Las Vegas. So we end up accommodating a lot of what they're trying to do. We obviously support everything that they're doing. Anybody watching football, investing in football, putting football on television is good for us all. So we are definitely friends. We are definitely working together on all this. The interesting thing for those guys is, I'm not sure where they're going with their playoffs. They keep talking about maybe even expanding it beyond whatever they were at 12. If they go to 16 or something, they might need even another week for their playoffs. And I'm not sure how many more weekends they really have. The NFL, like you hinted at, stays out of the first couple Saturdays in September and stays all the way through the first couple Saturdays in December. But that third Saturday in December, that's an NFL day. I mean, we've been playing there something like 37 of the last 40 years. Like, that's an NFL day. And, yeah, look, it was a great day last year when you had the 2 NFL games and the 3 college football first-round games. There were an awful lot of people with an awful lot of choice. And, everybody did just fine. And the fans will vote with their remotes, and they'll tell us what they care about. And certainly the fact that, the 2 NFL games that day did pretty good viewership numbers, certainly enticed Fox to come up with their hand up and volunteer for a doubleheader that day. And, there's a couple of good NFL contests in there, and the college guys can do whatever they think is best. They don't have to play 1 Friday and 3 Saturday. They could play 2 Friday and 2 Saturday, and we all can kind of, overlap each other so that fans can watch the games they want to watch. But it wasn't really a thought of, hey, how do we compete with college football? It was really more along the lines of, hey, that third Saturday in December is an NFL day. We've been there forever. We'll be there again.
Speaking of the Saturday, after Christmas, and you guys have done this now for several years, where you take 5 games and that 3 of them are going to be flexed into that Saturday spot. Will that Saturday, December 27th, will it be a triple header?
It'll only be 2, actually. It'll only be 2. We need 7 NFL Network games, and this year, because of all the extra international games, they're going to take 6 of the 9:30 a.m. Sunday morning games, so they only need 1 late season Saturday. So that's Saturday, December 27th, only 2 games, 1 on NFL Network, 4:30 in the afternoon, and 1 on Peacock that night at 8 o'clock. So those 5 games listed as TBD, 2 of them to Saturday, the other 3 most likely back to Sunday. But TBD means TBD. They could go to Thursday night, they could go to Sunday night, they could go to Monday night. You remember Washington was in the TBD pool 2 of the last 3 years,
they were,
and found their way over to Sunday Night Football. So just shows what any of us know here 8 months out. As the games matter more, we'll put them in bigger television windows.
Yeah, I was just curious in terms of the 5 games that you hold back. I mean, I'm looking at it right now. You got Baltimore, Green Bay. That looks attractive now. But if it's really attractive, does that get held by CBS or by Fox or, going into that weekend?
No, that's the reason it's put in that TBD
for
pool.
Saturday.
It's unprotectable.
Yeah.
So all 5 of those are in the TBD pool. We'll find a good one for NFL Network. We'll find a good one for Peacock. The other 3 most likely come back to Sunday, and then we'll figure out who's playing for what, who needs what. CBS and Fox, 1 o'clock and 4 o'clock. We got a pretty good doubleheader game sitting there in Philly, Buffalo. So I think we're going to be all right on Sunday afternoon, but that's the beauty of the TBD pool. None of those can be protected by CBS and Fox. They are all truly TBD.
Yeah, I guess what I was trying to get at is that Saturday doubleheader window attractive for you guys?
Well,
is it a bigger spot than the Sunday spot because they're standalone or not?
Yeah, definitely. I mean,
okay.
Standalone Saturday window, an NFL Network game in that time slot gets 10 or 11 million viewers. We're going to be playing on Peacock that Saturday night. And look, if it is a game like Baltimore-Green Bay and both teams are strong and healthy and playing for something, I think we're talking about, 15 million people watching. You're probably not going to get that many eyeballs on your game on a Sunday afternoon at 1 o'clock.
Right.
There's other games going on. We're distributing them across the whole country. So
sure.
If these games are worthy of national television, here's a couple of Saturday slots where we can put them in. And if they, like you said, get really big and really need to be in a bigger window, you can always move them to Sunday night like we've done with Washington the last two of the last 3 years.
I had a question with respect to the international games, the Vikings back-to-back weeks against Pittsburgh and Dublin and then Cleveland in the UK the following week. Is it a disadvantage for them to be there 2 weeks, or is it more of an advantage that they have two less road games, true road games, than the rest of the conference? I mean, some have one less road game because they're also playing internationally. But where's the rub there? Is it tough to be there for 2 weeks, or is it absolutely a plus for them that they're having two true road games played in neutral locations?
Yeah, we would not have done this without their cooperation, we wouldn't have done it over their objection. When we reached out to them, they can see the schedule. They knew they were visiting Pittsburgh this year, and they knew Pittsburgh was hosting a game in Dublin, so they were a candidate for that. Same thing with Cleveland. They knew they had to go to Cleveland. They knew Cleveland was hosting a London game, so they were a candidate for that. And it was actually Commissioner Goodell who said, do you think they would do both? Just go over and stay. To which I said, absolutely not, no chance. But I called them, I asked them, and they went from, intrigued to open-minded to willing and all the way to eager. And I'm sure kind of like you're hinting at, take what could have been road games in Pittsburgh and Cleveland in December in the snow and the cold and a hostile environment. And now you turn them both into neutral sites, get them over with, get them in early, get a little bonding trip for your team. They can spend the week over there in the UK. They've got marketing rights over there. You probably remember last year's London game. I think it was Jets-Vikings.
Yeah.
That building was 70% purple.
Right.
Most of the London games are like a rainbow, a kaleidoscope, people just wearing NFL jerseys. But there's Viking fans over there. So when the whole building's purple, I'm sure it made the Vikings think, what could we do if we spent a whole week over there, if we practiced, if we marketed, if we trained, if we had some events, some meet and greets, and yes, get two of our road, cold weather, hostile environment road games out of the way, done with them by week 5, not have them hanging over your head anymore. I'm sure there was a little bit of marketing, but also a little bit of competitive in their minds.
We also have a Rooney who was the ambassador to Ireland. So who knows how that will shake out Steeler fans wise in Dublin. But you mentioned it already, but I would have to imagine that Chiefs Cowboys on Thanksgiving Day has a chance to be an all-timer in terms of eyeballs.
Certainly what we're thinking about. I mean, most years, like we said, we don't normally go that big on
right.
Thanksgiving because, there's a floor for that. And we're lucky enough to become, part of the fabric of that day in this country. It just becomes part of the ambiance, part of the event, part of the family, and the television's on. And the interesting thing about, Dallas on Thanksgiving, that's almost always our most watched game every year, no matter what. Throughout the records, the Cowboys Thanksgiving game is almost always our most watched game of the season. Last year, that Bears-Lions game earlier in the day almost beat it. They got up to 50 million people watching by the end of that game when they missed the field goal at the very end. So that kind of tells you that what has become, not just the fabric of the day, but also two really good teams, two really fun teams now that Detroit is competitive again and fun and interesting. And so if you're going to go big with a KC Dallas in the afternoon, you probably have to go big. It's only fair to Fox to go a little bit bigger into Detroit, and that's why you see Green Bay there. And then to be fair to NBC, if you're going to do a Green Bay Chicago, a Green Bay Detroit, and a KC Dallas, you probably got to go pretty big at night as well, and that's why you see a Baltimore Cincy there. So probably bigger than we've normally done on Thanksgiving, and yeah, I think we've got a real good shot at hopefully the biggest Thanksgiving day ever.
All right, you're so generous with your time. I'll finish it up with this. When it's all over every year, and I'll just ask you specifically about the last, week and a half since the schedule came out. 2 weeks now. Do you look at it and say, I really wish we had gotten that thing that we were thinking about, but I'm really thrilled that this one kind of stuck. Is there a regret, and is there a God, I'm so glad we got that one right when it's all said and done, specific to this year's schedule for you?
Yeah, look, bit of both. There's always that, what could we have done differently? What worked out? What do we wish we could have changed? Wave a magic wand. Probably would have loved to have seen that Baltimore-Cincinnati Thanksgiving night game in Cincinnati. I think this will be 3 years or maybe 4 years in a row where we've played Cincy at Baltimore in prime time at night, maybe even on a short week. I'm not 100% sure about that, but certainly knew that going in. And again, wave a magic wand, probably would have loved to have played that game in Cincinnati, but like we were saying, you got teams playing multiple short weeks, and you can't play them both on the road, and we kind of like that Baltimore at Miami game for Amazon. It just felt like a good kind of ballast in the middle of their schedule. So once you put Baltimore at Miami on Amazon, you can't put Baltimore at Cincinnati on NBC on Thanksgiving night, and so trickle down from there. Wave a magic wand, I would have loved to have seen that game in Cincy. I think the Bengals deserve it, but they've got plenty of primetime games. What do any of us know? It's the beauty of this sport, right? It's 4 months until the season starts, 8 until, the games that decide the playoff spots are getting played. We're all just guessing, but did feel like we had 272 really strong quality assets this year. Felt like we could take some really good stuff off the top, go a little bit bigger in windows where we normally wouldn't, kick off Thanksgiving, Black Friday, Christmas, and still have enough quality and depth left over to cover Sunday nights, Monday nights, CBS and Fox doubleheaders, Thursday nights, the late season Saturdays. It feels in May like a really good schedule, an opportunity for teams to really kind of earn the spots, earn the opportunity that they've got, and that includes Washington. I mean, we root for all 32 equally, but certainly the ones we're counting on for national television windows, rooting for them just a little bit more.
Well, I mean, it's not necessarily Christmas morning, and there's so much information leading up to that actual full unveil. But man, when it comes out for some of us and, geeks, I'm sure people will be saying as they're listening to this, but I love it. And you get to kind of look forward to this, incredible 18-week journey and kind of envision what it'll look like on certain days. I think you guys did a phenomenal job. It had to be harder. I mean, NFC East, NFC North, NFC East, AFC West. It just created so many alluring
games,
matchups.
Right? You can just look up and down the schedule, week 1 through 18. There's so much good stuff there. Let's hope it all plays out the way we envisioned. And I love that people care. I love that people want to talk about it. I mean, you've been doing this long enough. The schedule used to kind of come out under the cover at night, mid-April,
right.
Like one Thursday. Oh, here it is. And nobody talked about it. Nobody cared. Nobody wanted to know how the sausage gets made. I love that people care now. Obviously, with the extra scrutiny obviously comes, armchair quarterbacks and a lot of Monday morning quarterbacking. And it's a fun process to be a part of. It's a great project to get to participate in for the last couple of decades. And, it's going to be really fascinating to see where we go from here. But glad this one's in the books. And honestly, I wish the season was starting tomorrow. Let's go.
Well, congrats. It looks great to me, Mike. I know how much hard work goes into it. Really appreciate you making time for us a month ago and today as well. Can't wait for the season, like you said, and hopefully we can do it again next year. Appreciate it.
You got it, my friend. Take care.
That was fascinating. Loved the insight from Mike North on the putting together of the NFL schedule. And we learned a couple of things that were definitely in play and something that was completely out of play for our team. I'll, have a few thoughts and follow up when we come back. Also, we will get to what Saquon Barkley said just about a week and a half ago about his Eagles in 2024. Kevin Sheehan Show, the Team 980, the team980.com. We're free and live on the Odyssey app. So just a couple of things on what Mike North told us about putting together a Washington schedule and the NFL schedule overall. So, I do this stupid mock schedule every year, and I had Washington opening up in Dallas. One of the things I learned in the conversation with Mike is that if there was no possibility of Washington playing in Dallas because Thursday Night Football on NBC is in Philadelphia. And the geographic proximity matters because unlike with Fox and CBS, NBC's got one bank of trucks and cameras and the whole thing for their one game a week. And so they're not going from Philadelphia to Dallas. They're going to go from Philadelphia to D.C. to Baltimore to New York, or in this case, on Sunday Night Football to Buffalo in week one. So that wasn't a possibility. Thanksgiving weekend, you get Baltimore hosting on Thanksgiving night, and then Washington, because it's so close, hosting on the following Sunday night against, in that particular case, they've got a game on Sunday Night Football Thanksgiving weekend against Denver. So that's one thing I've got to make a mental note of when I do my next mock schedule, if I decide to even do one again. Number two is, it sounds like, well, he said this, Chicago and Washington, week one Monday Night Football was on the schedule list for a while. But the reason essentially that they took it off is because Amazon wanted Green Bay and Lambeau for sure for their first game of the year, which is week 2 in the Thursday night spot. They don't have week 1 on Thursday night because NBC has that. So Amazon's first game comes week 2 on Thursday Night Football, and the league thought it made sense for that to be a big-time matchup between Green Bay and Washington. So once they decided and Amazon wanted Jaden against Green Bay at Lambeau as their first game, then Washington couldn't be on Monday Night Football. So then they had to be moved back to the Sunday night spot. And yes, Washington could have been a Sunday night game in week 1, but not with a Thursday night in week 2. You won't see typically a team play Sunday Night Football. You'll never see a team play Monday Night Football and then have to play a Thursday night game, especially on the road. So Washington immediately went back into that, 1 o'clock or 4 o'clock window on Sunday. So Washington, Chicago was a possibility for that Monday night opener. By the way, Chicago is going to play on Monday Night Football with Caleb Williams, Ben Johnson to open up the season at home against the Vikings. That's the opening Monday night game of the year. I thought it was interesting that Washington in Brazil against the Chargers, because they have the Chargers as a road opponent this year, was never a possibility because, in essence, the Chargers didn't want to lose a home game in SoFi against Washington because of the excitement right now over Washington. And by the way, the understanding that there are a lot of transplanted Redskins fans in Southern California. This being a very transient market, LA being the recipient of transient markets in many cases, lots of Skins fans, Commanders fans, Redskins fans in SoCal. Washington hasn't played against the Chargers in SoFi. They've played against the Rams in SoFi, not the Chargers in SoFi. We know that the Chargers do not draw well from their own fan base, so they really need fan bases to bring in their own fans, and they saw that as an opportunity. I'm sorry, did you say something?
I said check your phone. I sent you a tweet from Jordan Schultz on Terry McLaurin. It's an interesting thing. You know what? Since we're doing it now, I might as well read it. All-pro wide receiver Terry McLaurin has made it clear to the team that he's frustrated with the lack of progress on a long-term deal. As I previously reported, McLaurin unexpectedly left voluntary workouts after initially attending, and it remains to be seen whether he'll report for mandatory minicamp. McLaurin is entering the final year of his contract. Talks have been minimal. from the desk.
I'll get to
Jordan
this
Schultz.
in a moment, just
Sure.
because it's from Jordan Schultz, and I don't know how much of that is typically accurate. I mean, we'll find out from our own beat group whether or not Terry's legitimately frustrated. But let me just finish with my thoughts on this. It's just the fact that the Chargers would not want a Washington game to go away, and then the idea that Kansas City, Dallas could be a record breaker on Thanksgiving Day. They decided to hit big and go big on Thanksgiving Day, and that may be the all-timer. Anyway, yeah, so you're going to have to tell me, but for some reason, when you just mentioned it to me that it's Jordan Schultz, is this legitimate source typically?
So Jordan seems to be pretty plugged in, I mean, everywhere. So
Really?
I listen, I am not here to, I don't know how well sourced Jordan Schultz is. But this is what he's saying. And a lot of we know this team doesn't let a lot of things leak. But when they do, they'll drop like little hints through these guys who are a little bit have more of a national following.
Did Terry leave yesterday?
He wasn't there. And I think the leaving, quote unquote, is talking about him showing up for voluntary workouts, and then once OTAs started, he wasn't there. So I think that's kind of what he means by leaving voluntary workaups.
We'll reach out to Ben and see if Ben's got some time to jump on with us real quick.
For sure.
Because I am interested to see what sometimes, like, I for whatever reason, and I'm forgetting the specifics, but there was a report recently, like in the last month, and the accuracy was just off because there was a part of it that was just not even true. One of those parts being that somebody wasn't even present. It didn't deal with Terry, and I'm just forgetting what it is. Look, if Terry being frustrated with the lack of progress on a long-term deal, how many times, seriously, are players not frustrated with the progress of talks on a long-term contract extension, especially as that player gets older?
I would also like my money
more
as soon as
challenging.
possible.
I'm sorry?
I would also like my money as soon as possible. So I understand. I understand where Terry's coming from completely.
Yeah, but my point is, these deals always get more difficult, and at certain positions as players get older. Now, to me, Terry is a guy you want to take care of. But let's face it, Terry currently at his age, we've got a player entering his age 30 season, right? He's not, going to get a top 5 average annual deal, which would put him, somewhere north of $30 million a year. You've got Chase, Jefferson, Lamb, Metcalf, A.J. Brown, Amon-Ra St. Brown is the top 6 that are over $30 million a year. They are 25, 26, 26, 28, 28, and 26 years old, respectively. The only guy ahead of Terry making more money than he's making right now is the recent deal signed by Tyreek Hill. He is a year older than Terry. And let's face it, I love Terry McLaurin, but he's never been in the category of Tyreek Hill when Tyreek's been at his best. So, I don't know what Terry's looking for, but if he's looking for kind of top 5 money, I would expect the pushback. Washington has to be responsible, but at the same time, reward Terry for the player that, he has been, but much more so on the player he will continue to be and grow into. Remember, this is, good advice for anybody that is seeking any kind of compensation increase in any job environment. You don't go in and talk about what you've done. You talk about what you're going to do. What you've done, you've already been compensated for. An employer, most smart employers, that's not their concern. It's about what you're going to do. So always emphasize a future and what you're going to bring to the table moving forward rather than resting on what's been accomplished. And in this game, obviously, where there is a shelf life and a short shelf life, teams have to be careful. I would be shocked if there's not an agreement reached with Terry McLaurin before training camp. But at the same time, my favorite football team, I don't want them just doling out willy-nilly top 5 contracts when it doesn't make sense. I think we can safely say after the season he had last year, and I know this will be a conversation at some point over the summer because we've done it for multiple years in a row. Where does Terry rank? Where is he on the wide receiver list? You can certainly, after his first season in the NFL, with a legitimate starting NFL quarterback. He had never played, not one game, with a legitimate NFL starting quarterback. And there were several opportunities, but not one quarterback that threw him a pass was an NFL starting quarterback. And when he finally got one, he was sensational. And he is now in the conversation of certainly top 10, but not top 5. He's not in the class of what I would say top 2, Chase Jefferson. That's your elite high level. After that, you get a next group. Is he in that next group with 6'5", 6'7" guys? You can argue it better now that we've seen him with with an actual quarterback. But he might be just outside that. He may be right around 10, plus or minus 2 spots. Still. And then when you're factoring it into a compensation conversation, you have to take into consideration his age. But rarely, especially as players get older and teams have to become more discerning, it seems to me rarely do you not end up with maybe a more protracted contract negotiation where more times than less, there's going to be the expression of frustration coming from the players' side. We're seeing it in Cincinnati right now with a 30-year-old superstar pass rusher. Now, he is wildly undercompensated at this point. And look, Terry at his $23.5 million on average, right? Isn't that the AAV for Terry's last 2022 deal? It should be. Terry's average per year, $23.2 million right now. Okay, which ranks 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16th in the NFL. It is not good enough, and he's going to get compensated more. Is he going to get $30 million or more a year? I guarantee you that's what he's looking for. I guarantee you he's looking for a Brandon Ayuk, Amon-Ra St. Brown kind of a deal. He's not going to get a Chase Jefferson or CeeDee Lamb kind of a deal, or what DK Metcalf just got from Pittsburgh, after the trade. But, is he going to get, top 10, somewhere in that neighborhood? He deserves that. So we'll see what happens. But he's the oldest, out there, in that range. Calvin Ridley, believe it or not, is still at $23 million. Devontae Adams is at $22 million, 33 years old. Could you make the case that Devontae Adams is still a better receiver than Terry? He's certainly right there. That's going to be a great combination this year. Stafford with Puka Nacua and Devontae Adams this year has a chance to be really, really good in the NFC, with an obvious designer and play caller and Sean McVay. So we'll see. I did not know, and I didn't see reported that Terry, we knew that he was not a participant in OTA workouts, but I believe Ben told us yesterday, did he not, that Terry was present for those workouts. Did he leave? Was he frustrated with recent talks? Jordan Schultz from the Schultz Report. Sources, Commanders All-Pro wide receiver Terry McLaurin has made it clear to the team that he's frustrated with the lack of progress on a long-term deal. He writes, as I previously reported, McLaurin unexpectedly left voluntary workouts after initially attending, and it remains to be seen whether he'll report for mandatory minicamp. McLaurin is entering the final year of his contract. Talks have been minimal. We'll see if we can get more information on this. Kevin Sheehan Show, the Team 980 and the team980.com. So Jordan Schultz of the Schultz Report just had news sources. Commanders All-Pro wide receiver Terry McLaurin has made it clear to the team that he's frustrated with the lack of progress on a long-term deal. He writes, as I previously reported, McLaurin unexpectedly left voluntary workouts after initially attending, and it remains to be seen whether he'll report for mandatory minicamp. Joining us now is our Washington insider, our good friend Ben Standig from The Athletic. So I'll just ask you, what do you make of this report?
This is, I don't make too much of it. I'm not going to change my stance and that this is ultimately going to, get resolved. And, this is how negotiations work to some degree when you especially have a high profile player. A few weeks ago, as Schultz said that he put something out, he posted that McLaurin missed or wasn't there for OTAs. Yes, obviously that was true, but there's been no other real follow up. It's just coming from this one guy. So I'm not saying he's not being told this. I just don't think it means much more than it's just negotiations. I'm not gonna. My stance has been, wake me up when we get close to training camp if something still isn't done. If he were to miss mandatory minicamp in a couple of weeks, all right. Well, that's a little something, but again, the players only have so much leverage, in any discussion, and putting something out there publicly to potentially help, bolster fan support and that type of deal is something that they can do. So for me, to me, this is just kind of what that is for now. I don't really see too much. I don't see too much reason to be concerned. The one thing I've said, and I think we talked about this when I was on earlier the week, that, the age might be the only thing, not that Terry's an old guy, but of the top 15 or so wide receivers in terms of annual average salary, only Tyreek Hill is older than him.
Right.
So unless Washington is really hammering home that point in terms of a multi-year deal, and, I don't know what you would point to suggest he's falling off anytime soon. But that would be the only thing. And even that, I just don't see it being a huge deal. So I'm not going to freak out about this. I can imagine some are or fans are, but I'm not going to at this stage.
Yeah, that's what I pointed out. Is just that, from the team side, if there's any truth to that, he's frustrated, it may be about, look, we want you, we want to give you a big contract extension, but you're not a top 5 average annual guy at this point, entering your early 30s. Real quickly though, did Terry, when these OTA days, first of all, in 2022, just so everybody remembers, he missed OTA days and he missed mandatory minicamp. In fact, he was fined the mandatory minicamp, whatever that number was, because he didn't get his deal signed until June 28th, and that was after mandatory minicamp. But I look, you know that I was sort of non-compass last week and out of it last week, but wasn't he present at OTA days, but just not a participant?
No, he wasn't in Ashburn last week, but he had been with the team earlier in the broader context of the off-season program, being in the building, listening, being around the teams. But once it became just the formal part is when he went away. So, I guess the thing, he's been with the team at points this offseason already, of the 3 main guys who've been away, Lattimore is the one who hasn't been around at all. The other 2 have been around to some degree at various points. So, look, I don't put, like I said, it is what it is. If he wants to, use this leverage as just that, then so be it. These are voluntary. When it happened, I remember in 2022, one thing that was unique about that was Carson Wentz was just arriving, so there was no chemistry, having been established. And whereas this one, obviously, Terry and Jaden Daniels are coming off a monster season. He's been in now Cliff Kingsbury's offense, et cetera. So, it's not that dire from that perspective either. And, Terry's always been, on top of his game in terms of being in shape, being prepared. And I would imagine nothing will change on that front.
correct me if I'm wrong. This is actually going to be the first contract extension with, a good existing player that Adam Peters and company have produced, correct? We didn't have one last year.
No, Sam Cosme, that was under this regime, right? That was last year.
Was it?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Stand corrected. I mean, much younger player, obviously, and in a different situation. I think, whatever the report is and how much accuracy there is, I'm not going to delve into. I kind of feel the way you do. And I also agree with you. Like, I'll be concerned, or it'll be an issue if we're, a day before training camp and no deal's been done, which we're 2 months away from, or a little bit less than 2 months away from. But I do think now, like, part of me in kind of looking at this, because before you jumped on with me, I was looking at, the salaries, and I'm like, this is one of those challenging contract extensions, and I even suggested that it's not unusual for older players seeking a contract extension that kind of seems deserved. I mean, Cincinnati's going through it right now with Trey Hendrickson. Now, he is wildly underpaid based on his production, but, the older a player gets, the more complicated this becomes, and it seems like there is often kind of this, level of reporting or, truthful in sort of tone to the relationship where there's some frustration. It's going to be interesting to see how the team handles it, because this is a guy who's wildly popular, is one of the best people you'd ever want on your roster, in your locker room, in your building, but he's 30 years old, and we are, probably 2 years, 3 years max away from him, more likely than not, based on the position, him being and approaching the downside of his career. And you also, Ben, with Terry, he's an interesting conversation every offseason, but much more so this offseason, after finally having an NFL quarterback, starting quarterback, to throw to him, about where he gets slotted, and during the break, I just pulled this up. PFF last week basically ranked the top 32 receivers ahead of the 2025 NFL season into tiers. And their tier one, which I would have had as 2 receivers, they had as 3. A.J. Brown, Justin Jefferson, and Jamar Chase. For me, Jefferson and Chase are in their own stratosphere, and then we can talk about what comes next. But they had Brown, Jefferson, and Chase in tier 1. Tier 2, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Puka Nacua, CeeDee Lamb, Nico Collins, Tyreek Hill, and then when we got to tier 3, Mike Evans, and then Terry McLaurin, along with Drake London, Malik Neighbors, Garrett Wilson, T. Higgins, Brian Thomas Jr., Devontae Adams, all in tier 3. Now, they had Terry ranked as the second tier 3 guy, which would put him at number 10 overall, but that's kind of part of, the agent and the negotiating group for Washington. He's got an age thing, and then there's this perception thing with Terry. It comes up with other players as well. But don't you feel like Terry's been one of these guys that's people have viewed as very underrated, and now you got to be careful not to overrate him after he played with a starting quarterback for the first time?
Yeah, look, obviously his first, several years in the league, the quarterback situation was, almost comical if it wasn't sad for all of us who were watching it unfold. Now he gets, what looks to be a dynamic star quarterback in this league, and he has a career high 13 touchdown receptions, and so much, went right last year for him. I guess, he was a 3rd round pick when he came in, so he didn't arrive with crazy hype. In fact, we all remember there was a lot of this talk about he's going to play special teams. How he may shine originally. He doesn't have. He's very fast based on normal humans. Based on the NFL, he doesn't even raise an eyebrow with his speed. He's got fine size, but he's not this hulking presence on the perimeter like an A.J. Brown or a Calvin Johnson. So, it's hard to distinguish, in your mind's eye, what is, what's a Terry McLaurin play. He's great with the contested catches, and we all have noticed that for sure. And make highlights. But and also he's like, he's essentially not a diva type. I know maybe that's
right.
This isn't the day to say that if you're going to be holding out, but in general, this is again negotiation, and he's not been that guy at all. He's all about helping the community in ways that are real. I went to one of his charity events a couple weeks ago, and it was another example of how he gives his not just his money or his name, but his time and thought to helping different parts of the area community. He obviously, from a locker room perspective, is we've heard other guys around here over the years who have been perceived as leaders who are not necessarily viewed that way to the max in the locker room. Terry is. And, again, when Adam Peters and Dan Quinn are talking about, they know what it means to be a commander, I don't know how this guy isn't on the poster. So, I get why he doesn't make, what people say, who are the best receivers in his name. I mean, 10 is pretty high, but it doesn't come up as easily as some of the others. But, after what he did last year in particular, he showed, hey, give me a good quarterback and watch me go.
Yeah. It's for, NFL teams are different than a lot of businesses, but typically in most businesses, you don't go in and pitch, on what you've accomplished looking for increased compensation. You pitch based on what you're going to do moving forward. And that's, there's a dynamic that exists in an NFL situation where you got to be careful, because if you don't take care of those players that have been really good in so many different ways, you can start to develop a reputation of not taking care of the players that should have been taken care of. But they've got a job to do here. They've got a cap to manage, and he is going to turn 30 when the season begins. But to your point, like, there was no sign at all at any point of Terry McLaurin looking like, he's towards the back end of his prime years. Even though by age, he's probably approaching more of the back end of his prime years. And a 3-year or a 4-year contract extension, paying him, to what looks like very expensive today is tomorrow's bargain. If he ends up getting close to what he wants, let's just call it $30 million, and he's in the top 6 or 7, that'll be, by the time we get to next year, barely top 10. And in 2 years, back to top 15-ish. I don't know. I'd be shocked if it doesn't get done. Let's conclude with that. You as well or not?
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, when I saw the tweet, before you guys reached out about coming on, I saw the tweet and I was like, okay, so I guess this is a topic for today. And, it changes the tenor of the conversation a little bit, because this update is more aggressive than just simply he isn't there. But yeah, I mean, look, we've already seen it on this particular player in the same circumstance, more or less. We've already seen a deal get negotiated and executed, and he showed up, and all was well. And we see this happen all the time around the league. Dallas had a situation with CeeDee Lamb, and then eventually got that done. And CeeDee Lamb's a guy who's like, he's just several years younger than Terry. He's like what I think like 3rd right now in terms of annual average salary. From a overall like team perspective and community and locker room, you can make a case that Terry McLaurin is as valuable as CeeDee Lamb, but CeeDee Lamb's younger. CeeDee Lamb is more physically imposing, and that's what it is. Eventually, even if that's like a point of, hey, why are we getting paid the same as this guy? I imagine eventually things get done. And again, I'm not here to take away somebody else's money or worth, but I've been projecting in my head just like a $30 million annual average salary.
Right.
T. Higgins is a little bit less than that. DK Metcalf is younger, a little bit more than that. It's very good money. I don't imagine it's like gonna, even Washington was stubborn. I don't imagine Terry's like going, well, this is unfair, this is unlivable, or anything along those lines. So, like I said, I'm with you. I'm nonplussed about any of this until we get outside of the mandatory mini camps, and we get, like you said, a couple days before training camp. Then okay, you can get me more intrigued. But right now, yeah, I think it'll eventually get done.
All right, let me go back to something we talked about yesterday, but this was before we had an OTA day yesterday. You didn't really have an answer as to how they felt. We did hear from Joe Witt Jr. On whether or not, they are plussed or non-plussed about the absence and continued absence of Marshawn Lattimore. Here's what Joe Witt Jr. said yesterday about Lattimore's fourth miss on an OTA day.
Okay, Marshawn hasn't been here. We've been in communication with him. So when he gets here, we'll see exactly where he is from a conditioning standpoint. From a mental standpoint, the coaches have been meeting with him, talking with him. And so he's a smart young man, but we'll see exactly where he is when he gets here.
So another day in the books since we talked yesterday. What do you think they're thinking? Do you have any idea? Because I guessed yesterday, I bet they're not totally pleased with this.
Yeah, so that was my question to Joe Witt, and the way I framed it was,
you ask great questions. You really do. Seems like every time I pull a soundbite, I swear to God, that is interesting to me. You ended up asking the question, but go ahead.
Well, I mean, we knew he was not there the week prior, but didn't definitively know that if he had not been in the building at all. So I kind of purposely asked, what have you seen? Because the previous question I was asked, what have you seen? What player stood out to you watching? And you mentioned Jerron Payne. So I was like, so okay, to that end, what has if you've seen him, what has stood out about Lattimore? And then he says, well, he hasn't been here. And again, this is all part of the deal. He's a voluntary practices, all that. But I don't know. I took a little bit from Joe Witt's response to say, hey, I guess we'll just see what he's like when he gets here. As maybe you should be here, right? Because it's not just that he's a veteran player who's had a lot of success in the league and is just choosing to be away. Here's a guy who got traded here last year, who missed a chunk of time because of a hamstring injuries that aren't just a one-off. This has been lingering for several years. And then, the performances were at best uneven. And then the two of the three playoff games weren't good really at all. So you would think that this would be like, hey, if I'm really motivated and focused on helping this team out, I'm showing up. Again, it's voluntary. He doesn't have to do that. He may be very well in the best shape of his career and has no issues. But the team doesn't know that. Even like Witt saying, people, we've had people, in constant communication with him, suggest that he's not one of those people, and defensive coordinators got to delegate. But, I would think like, hey, wouldn't you want to be reaching out to this guy unless, maybe like, we'll let him sort it out. I don't want to get into it. So, meaning if I'm the DC, so I don't want to, put too much of my thoughts onto what he's actually thinking. But yeah, I just kind of took it as a little bit like, yeah, well, he's not here. I guess we'll see what happens when he gets here. As kind of like, yeah, this is not ideal.
Yeah, I didn't really have a reaction to what he said. I played it because I was curious as to what you thought. I was looking for maybe at least a hint of some sort of an expression of being irritated, annoyed. But I guess that's in the eye of the beholder. Ear of the beholder. I just, we do this every year, and I've talked about it now for a second consecutive day. I just honestly, the only thing when these things come up for me is it is a peek inside the self-awareness window, the decision-making window. And this isn't a good look for Lattimore. It doesn't mean anything is in terms of whether or not he'll play great next year. There's no evidence that ties OTA attendance or off-season attendance to wins and losses. But when you are new in a place where you have not established what you established before, he's got a history of not showing for these OTAs in New Orleans. But in many cases, that was coming off a Pro Bowl kind of a season. He not only didn't establish himself here last year, it was the opposite of that. It was very disappointing after the trade. And now there are reasons for it. We understand that. Injuries, but when he was available, he wasn't very good. Hit and miss, best case, description. With a new team in an environment that has this vibe of all hands on deck, everybody's in, everybody loves the culture. I don't know. I think it's a really small commitment to make to show up to one or two of these things if you're in his position. That's assuming there's no personal issue here, that he's dealing with, but we haven't had any indication of that. So I think that being irritated with it, if you're a fan or even if you are on that team, is justifiable. And clearly he doesn't care.
Yeah, I mean, I've used this line before, but last year, as we all watched, it was basically a Disney movie for this team. Just, the unbelievable highs, and none of us were all sitting here going, is this really happening? What's going on? This is crazy. And, with Jaden and it just kind of kept going on and on and on, and all the way to the NFC Championship game. The one character, though, that was like reading from a different script, at least tonally, seemed to be Lattimore. He arrived mid-season. He wasn't there for the whole, bonding training camp and that stretch. He hadn't been there when this team was, having these, big wins and getting on these rolls. He wasn't there when they spent a week together in Arizona. So he's coming in with his own baggage. And like you said, this is, holding out was kind of his MO, or not holding out, but missing some of the voluntary practices was kind of his MO in New Orleans. From my sense was that, people who are around the team in New Orleans, that there wasn't any real love lost seeing Marshawn Lattimore leave. Obviously the Saints are in a bit of a different situation. They're more of a struggling team now than they are a contender. So it made sense for them to move on. But, there's been some questions about his, how he connects with, team management, what have you. And, I mean, it like you said, I think there is a lack of self-awareness. It's more, it feels like, and I don't want to get in somebody's head and all that, but it does feel like it's Dan Quinn's greatest gift last year was having all these guys rally together, these sort of misfits trying to figure it out. How do we pull together? Because that's the only way we're going to win. And he did it to a great degree. And Lattimore continues to feel like he's focused on his story and not the broader one, which, look, I mean, to each his own, but at the same time, when you're coming off the injuries, when you're coming off those couple of poor performances and you weren't with this team during some of these highs, then I mean, I think it's a little concerning. And just to the broader question, for all the talk about the culture and how things have changed, and look, there's million reasons to believe that it has. But to me, a huge part of this season is going to be now what happens with that culture when new pieces are coming in. The Houston, Tunsil isn't here yet. We'll see how that goes. And that's, again, fine, he's not here. But part of the reason why seemingly Houston moved on from him was that, the reports out of Houston have been that the chemistry in the offensive line room wasn't good, and they decided to make a change, and they changed out the guy who's the number one lineman.
Exactly.
All right, well, what does that mean? What does that mean going forward? Maybe nothing, but he's not considered to be like a leader type. So how does that fit into this ecosystem? Perhaps the same thing with like a Deebo Samuel, but he's showed up so far. He's done all the things that you would expect. He's a guy that is coming off a down season, heading into a contract year. He clearly seems to understand what all that means, and he's looks like he's doing all the stuff. So each player has their own unique vision and path, and Lattimore's right now does feel a bit odd considering what transpired last year.
Look, I think the league needs to do something about this. Tommy wrote about it the other day. Make them mandatory or don't do them. Because you basically put the player into a position to look bad, and even the team to look a bit foolish at times. But with that said, I think most of you people out there listening, not all of you people, but most of you people, if you were new to a company and there was a voluntary activity to kind of kick off the season or a work event, and 87 out of the 90 employees were attending, and you were brand new and you just decided to skip it, I just don't think it's a good look. And I put that on Tunsil too. There's just a lack of, when you're new to anything and everybody else, including everybody that's been there, is showing up for something that's voluntary, I can't imagine not showing up. But that's just me. Thank you for jumping on with short notice. I will talk to you later.
Always, man. See ya.
Ben Standig, everybody. Something else Joe Witt Jr. said yesterday about the defensive pass rush and the defensive run stopping in 2025 I thought was interesting. I'll play it for you next.
All right, Ravens have signed receiver Rashad Bateman to a contract extension. It is a 3-year deal with it that includes $20 million in guaranteed, worth up to $36.75 million. GM Eric DeCosta also said that they are in introductory stages of an extension for 2023 MVP Lamar Jackson. The Pittsburgh Penguins have hired Rangers assistant coach Dan Muse as their next head coach. This hire follows rumors that Caps assistant coach Mitch Love was a top candidate for the job. The Oilers, they close out the Panthers in an overtime thriller last night. They win 4-3. Leon Draisaitl skates it off with the overtime winner on the feed from Connor McDavid. The Nats, they shut out the Cubs by a score of 2-0. Mackenzie Gore, with 7 innings pitched, struck out 7 batters, only gave up 3 hits and no earned runs. They'll continue their series tonight. Jake Irvin takes the bump. Nats on deck with Charlie and David, 6:15 on 106.7 The Fan. First pitch at 6:45. This update is sponsored by the Team 980 YouTube page. Just open the app, type in the Team 980 and hit subscribe. Kevin Sheehan is live from 10 to 1 and Craig Hoffman from 4 to 7. Don't forget to like the stream and turn on notifications to stay up to date on all things DC sports. And that is what is trending.
So yesterday before the OTA session, Joe Witt Jr. spoke, and there was an interesting answer to a question that was pretty benign. He was just kind of asked about, what kind of breakout player will help replace the sack production from last year that Dante Fowler had. Listen specifically to the end of his answer.
I don't think going into the year anybody thought Dante was going to have 10.5 sacks last year. I don't think anybody in here would have said that. And so we'll have somebody that to produce a higher sack total than what's thought to be. Okay, and so who that person is, I don't know. Will it be a collective of guys? I don't know, but I do feel that our pass rush will be better. I do feel definitely that our run defense will be better. Where will it come from? Which individual? It's too early to say, but it will come.
Interesting, right? That he said, not only do I feel that our pass rush will be better, I do feel definitely that our run defense will be better. Where it sounds like he's wondering where it will come from as well. I would imagine he's got a better idea than we do in terms of where he sees the run defense improving, where he sees the additional pass rush coming from. But an interesting comment. Look, Dante Fowler Jr., none of us expected Dante Fowler Jr. to have 10.5 sacks last year. So it was great production from him. I'm kind of excited to see what Dorrance Armstrong can do off of the end of season that he had, especially in the postseason. I think Frankie Louvu in year 2 in this system could be used even more dynamically as a pass rusher. But yeah, the run defense too, we'll see. I mean, like I've talked about a lot over the years, there's much more variability year to year. There's much more variance year to year on defense than there is on offense. And many times you never see it coming, and it's kind of inexplicable as to why it happened, because sometimes it happens with the same group of people. We saw in 2022 an excellent defense here. And then in 2023 with essentially the same team, a horrible defense that particular year. All right, we're done for the day. Back tomorrow. Chris is next.